Okay, so welcome everyone, and some of you may have been here the last time. We kind of had standing room only here, so you just never know how it's going to roll. So if you at some point decide you want a different seat or you think you get a better angle from a different place in the room, please feel free to move around.
Or more tea.
That's right, or more tea, and I think everyone knows where the washroom is. So some of you I know, and for some of you I don't know. So. My name is Holly Niles, and I'm a licensed functional medicine clinical nutritionist. So that's a lot of adjectives. And the distinction that's made with being functional medicine is what we're really talking about here, and it's really the filter through which really this whole talk comes, is this idea of functional medicine. So some of you may have heard of that before. So functional medicine is really about addressing the whole person, not just isolated symptoms. And this is really the standard definition, but it's, sometimes when I put this in a deck, I think, oh, well, maybe I should condense it, and it's too many words. But these words, I think, are really important. It's about spending time with a patient or client, listening to the whole story. We think everything matters, from how you were born to your family history to how your life is. So looking at genetic, environmental, lifestyle factors that can influence disease and really well-being or the lack of well-being. And what we know is that everybody has a unique expression. Everyone is unique in how their health unfolds. And so that's really the lens of our talk tonight. So this is a variation. So in functional medicine, we always talk about getting to the root cause. So this idea of a tree is a great image because often if we see a tree, if we see the symbolism may be symptoms or imbalances. So you see several common imbalances, really we'll say the leaves of the tree. But functional medicine says rather than just treat them like my right arm hurts, okay, we're going to give you, the medicine that's for right arm pain. We might say, well, maybe we want to do something about that pain, but we want to step back and look at the root causes. How did you get to that place where you have this imbalance in your body? And tonight we're kind of focusing on stress, so I've circled that, but you'll see as I talk that it's really hard to separate it out, right? It's really all of these lifestyle factors that make a huge impact in how our bodies function. And I think that my experience is that when I present that to someone who's never heard the term functional medicine, most people say, well, that makes perfect sense. It's one of the challenges I have, right? I have a cardiologist and I have a PCP and I have, a rheumatologist, and they don't talk to each other, right? So each person is treating this little separate thing, but nobody gets together and says what's really happening with me or with my life. So stress, it's kind of one of those big words kind of that we hear all the time, like Kleenex, right? It becomes this universal word. So stress, and probably most of you have used it, somebody who's under stress, you find yourself saying they're very stressed. It's too much stress. Well, you know what? I'm very stressed out. It becomes such a part of our lingo that we sort of don't pay attention to it. It's like, well, everybody's stressed, right? We hear that all the time, that everybody's stressed and overwhelmed and in a sense sort of feeling this burden. And so one of the things that I'm going to suggest about stress as we look at it this evening is really tuning into what we might actually learn is maybe an appropriate response from our bodies in response to this chronic stress. So I'm a very practical gal. I always like to start out with a definition. So what actually is stress? So this is one of those straight by the book definitions. So it's your body's way of responding to any kind of a demand or a threat. And the key part of this is when we feel threatened, it's our nervous system that really responds, right? It gives us some stress chemicals, things that we're familiar with, adrenaline, cortisol, and it actually rouses the body for emergency. So it's really, the image I always like to think of is kind of a primal man being chased by the saber-toothed tiger. So what's happened, and I observe because I have a lot of patients and clients, and we kind of throw that around. Oh, everybody, I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. And so we've kind of now put it in a place where it seems like this really bad thing that our body has these responses to our environment, to the different circumstances that we place on the body. And so I'm going to actually propose that we look at it a little broader to say, is it ever a good thing? And in fact, as is true with most things that we experience, that I notice that happen with clients, is that often it's really a normal part of life, right? We're designed to manage some stress. So if we think about this idea of survival, the primal man, right? So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, a little more, but this idea of being chased by the tiger. Well, now the body ultimately wants to survive, so it has this actual brilliant system where it says, let's give you energy into your muscles. We'll give you a little shot of extra adrenaline, extra hormones that are going to make you be able to run really fast. And I think, hopefully you had two outcomes, right? Either you got eaten or you got back to the cave. And I'm never convinced that they maybe spent all their time then discussing like, wow, you see the tiger that was after me today? Oh, I think my tiger was bigger, right? It was about survival. So we can say that it's really, our body is absolutely designed. The challenge comes in that this stress response is really supposed to be like a Navy SEAL, in and out, right? Not hanging out for a really long time. And to that end, I think we always want to come back to the body's, it always draws towards homeostasis. So a lot of us probably remember that word. Maybe you use it in day-to-day, but it certainly throws back to maybe biology class we had, this idea of coming into balance. So whenever the body is taken into a hyper state, whether it's a hyperglycemic or sugar state or overstimulated, it always wants to rebound, right? It likes to come back into balance. And in fact, it has. In our stress system, we have that capacity, right, to come back into balance. And our body actually communicates when we're out of balance. So when we're, so to say, burning the candle at both ends, or we have a really stressful time, we start to feel it, right? We start to feel tired. We feel like even though we eat, we don't pick up our energy. And in the sense, that's really the wisdom of the body letting us know. So where the challenge comes is not so much stress, and this might be a little bit of semantics, it's really chronic stress, right? Stress that happens every day, most events, most days without a break. And that's where we get to this idea of dis-ease, right? It really comes from that chronic, overwhelming stress. And I think probably most of you could maybe account of, your own life, or maybe your child's life, or a neighbor where people are working full time and managing kids and trying to work out and trying to get, their cooking done, or maybe they have an ailing partner or mother or, family member that they're trying to look after while they're still trying to take care of themselves. So we see this world that we live in, we get into these scenarios where we get into this chronic stress going on, day to day to day without really any breaks. So interestingly enough, there's actually an American Institute of Stress. I'm sure there's probably multiple institutes of stress. That's website is www.stress.org, which I thought was almost a little classic. But this is what they list as the illnesses that have some relationship to this chronic stress. And it's pretty much every single thing, right? Every imbalance. I'm sure, everything from depression, anxiety, so there's mood, heart attack, stroke, autoimmune disorders. We have the GI system, degenerative, neurological things. So we really can tie everything back to chronic stress, which I think is probably relatable to most of us, if we think about that. But I found that a little bit staggering to see that whole list, that this is an organization that has actually done research and gathering statistics. It's not just like, oh, that makes sense. This really is an impacting statistic. So we'll talk a little bit tonight about what I've sort of termed the three expressions of chronic stress. And no, there's no political angle to my talk tonight, even though we have President Obama up there. So I've kind of really parsed it down to three major expressions. So there's physical or physiological stress. So that's really illnesses, imbalances that happen in the body. So we'll use an example, arthritis, right? So the body is under some kind of a stress. It's out of balance. It's inflamed. So it's working to manage that. At the same time, there is our response to stress, right? So if we are a person who, let's say you're the person who has arthritis. So maybe the response is, I can't move as quickly. I can't carry my groceries in. I'm concerned that I can't keep up at work. I'm not sleeping as well because I'm in pain. I feel like the things I used to do, I have to ask someone to help me. So often, and I see this a lot clinically, it's what I kind of call those stress layers, right? So my body's under stress, and then my response to how that impacts my life is another layer of stress. Then we have mental stress. So this is a very classic picture, right? We could do this with pretty much every modern American president. You know, this is Barack Obama when he started, and this is him now. I mean, we see it, right? He's got white hair. He's got, his eyes have changed. It's like, and that's really that impact of daily chronic stress, mental stress, right? Worry, overwhelm. I mean, talk about being always in an emergency, right? So, and we might even see him as a pretty fit guy, right? He doesn't seem to have a lot of physical imbalances that we know of. He plays basketball, he's very active, but yet this impact of stress has aged him, right? It's really made him, we could say, sick in some ways. It's really oxidized him. And then there's the emotional stress, right? So that can be, and you may think as you look at these, you can see where often these are happening simultaneously, right? We can't always make these distinctions between each separate expression, but things like fear, anxiety. So let's say you're the person who you were in a bad car accident, and you may have physically had some stress, and as you resolve it, maybe now every time you get into a car, you think about that again. You become anxious. You're afraid to get into a car. Now that puts us back into that emotional stress. At that moment, your body's safe, right? You're just sitting in the car. And I think this piece is probably a very significant one, because what we know is that when we are actually in a stressful situation, so if we use the example of running from the saber-toothed tiger, that creates all those physiological impacts. But what we know is the mind is so powerful is that even if we sit in the chair and imagine we're being chased by the tiger, all those same things happen, right? The same cascade of chemicals happens in the body. And I would say in my clinical experience, I think that kind of emotional stress is probably one of the biggest things that I see, right? Anxiety, depression, worry, we see this really as an epidemic. So you have a folder that you may have peeked in. If you were like me, you would have already peeked in to see what was in there. But there are a few handouts in there, and we'll talk about them later. This handout you're going to be sent by email. We always send a little group. And this one we probably could spend an hour on. We're not going to spend an hour on it, but this is really the heart of what we're talking, right? Is our nervous system. So our nervous system has these two main parts. So there's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Probably a lot of people are living in the sympathetic nervous system. Now, what's brilliant about this system and challenging, so this is what we sometimes call the fright-flight system, right? That's that I'm being chased by a tiger. What happens with this is you see there are some very specific physical things that happen when that system gets turned on. So we have, it's actually a catabolic system. It breaks actually down. It breaks us down to begin to free up energy, because the idea is you need energy to be brought into your muscles, right? If I'm running, I need to actually get some glucose to get some energy to run. We also know that it releases certain hormones. It actually, we have cortisol, we have adrenaline. At the same time, there are these physiological changes, right? Our heart starts to beat faster. Sure.
Is cortisol linked to cortisone?
It's different. No, they're different. Yeah. So our heart beats faster, our pupils dilate, so I think, again, if you think of that idea of running, so there's some real physical things are happening. Now, if we think of raised blood pressure and heart rate, we know those occur when people have cardiovascular issues, right? So there's a precursor often to how we start planting the seeds for the body to get out of balance with this stress response. We also know that digestion, the focus on digestion, gets very limited, because how I always see it is if you're in an emergency, and sometimes we eat when we're in that state, we all know that. I always think the body's going, really? Why are we eating right now? Shouldn't we be running? Like, I'm confused. Like, if we're in an emergency, I think we need to run. And so it shifts our energy away from our digestion, right? I always think sympathetic to me is extremities, right? It's that ability to move. All the energy comes out of our core. And we do know, and we talked about this, that it is a normal part of our functions. It should be simple. I'm driving to work. All of a sudden, somebody has a little fender bender. Now I'm going to be late because the guys, got to come and get the tow truck. And so that's a little stressful because I had a 9 o'clock meeting. I had plenty of time to get there, and now I'm late.
The cell phone doesn't have any charge.
Right, exactly. Your phone doesn't have charges. That's sort of an everyday stress. It should be resolved. You go to the meeting, all is well. Those are the kinds of things we would think of. Now, if we shift to the other system, which doesn't always get visited by people all the time. So that's our parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system. So I always think the image of this, and some of you have probably seen this when they do the travel ads, right? There's the person who's in the chaise lounge with the sun hat on the beach with the cocktail, right, with their feet kind of folded, like everything's great, right? They're on vacation. That's really how this system rolls. So this is actually a building system, right? This is how we create health, because it's anabolic. It wants to build muscle. It wants to help repair. It also is things like growth hormone, reproductive hormones, right? So if we think that's a really great example, so if those reproductive hormones are effective, we have lots of challenges, right? People have a lot of reproductive challenges now, a lot of infertility. There's a lot of research suggesting these very high stress lifestyles are actually depleting some of those hormones. And this is really the repair phase of the body. So this is where, for me, it's all the D's, the digestion, all the eliminative processes, sleep, they all happen in that parasympathetic state. It's in a way like the timing and the focus of how our body does house cleaning, right? It's what we would expect. Now, we tend to think of this, and this slide shows this, that it's really happens mostly at night. So now if we throw in, and we'll talk about this as we go, but so nighttime, a nice good night's sleep, the body can repair. So most people don't get a lot of sleep, right? Or they don't sleep well. So they go to bed at midnight, they get up at 5. How much repair could have happened, right? Probably the cell phone's at the side of the bed, right? The last thing that they did before they went to sleep, as soon as the alarm goes off. So there's that overstimulation that's happening. So a lot of these functions that we would expect that the parasympathetic would have the time for, it's not getting a proper chance. And in many ways, we could say that this underactive parasympathetic system really could be the roots of a lot of imbalances, right? If we could just get that parasympathetic at the table, literally, or more active, we could see that the body then comes into balance, because this is how the body does this naturally. So if we look at stress and the digestive system, so I've picked just a couple of ways to view this if we think of, because this is a real common imbalance. So some of you may have digestive imbalances, you may know somebody who has them. So one of the things that happens a lot in modern life, and I've been fortunate enough to see hundreds and hundreds of patients, and the phenomena of fast eating, I used to always say was a North American phenomena, but in fact, I've had international patients who will admit to the same thing. So it just seems to be a world phenomena that most people eat fast, right? It's like, and if you're a person who is the preparer of meals, that can be a little bit of a rub sometimes, right? You're in your kitchen for 45 minutes making a dinner, and 5 minutes it's all done, right? So we eat really, really fast, but that fast eating, often in this stress landscape, it actually slows down digestion, because remember, if I'm under chronic stress and I'm eating, I don't have the right system on board, right? The sympathetic is kind of running things, and this scenario is common. I'm sitting at my desk, I've got, so many emails, or I'm behind and I needed to get something done, and I'm eating and I'm stressed, and I'm eating quick and I've got a deadline, and so there's really no connection to digestion at that point, right? The body again is a bit confused. So when we slow down digestion, we actually begin to decrease some of the stomach acid, right? So when we chew properly, the GI system is a brilliant one. And I'll say in this context that functional medicine always speaks about systems biology. And that's something that we don't always reference in conventional medicine. So we think the stomach has its experience and it's all wrapped up and done. It has no impact on what happens, right, in the lower GI, or there's not an impact to other things. But what we see here, and you'll see this connection, is that as soon as we're in that space, so now I haven't chewed properly, we've already shifted things. So when the food gets into the stomach, we actually have a decrease of stomach acid because we haven't given the proper signals, right? We haven't told the body, here you go, we're gonna bring some food in. So then we start really getting things like reflux and indigestion. Well, probably almost everybody in this room has had that at least once. I'm sure you could name me 2, 3, 4, 5 people you know have that problem. And then we get things like GERD. So GERD is like, I don't know, like used to be everybody had high cholesterol. Everybody has GERD now, right? And maybe even some of you have GERD. So gastroesophageal reflux disorder, right? So it's reflux, heartburn, really, right? So I have seen clinically, honestly, now here's what I'll say. I've seen hundreds of patients with GERD. I've seen a very small percentage that probably really have reflux, real true reflux. But so often the way we're eating and how we're eating, which we'll talk about, sets the body up. The body's smart. It's like, hey, you didn't chew, you did it super fast. How do you expect me to process that, right? And that's where we start to get this. Now, I didn't gather the stats on that, but I know it's in the millions of dollars of people who take Prilosec, all those, those over-the-counter medications, right? And some of you, I don't know if some of you have been reading recently, because I've had patients come to me, some really, really intense research is coming out now, right? About issues with bone loss and taking them, kidney issues, right? So now it kind of makes sense. So if we go back to systems biology, what happens at the top of the chain where we're digesting our food? Our food is how our body thrives. When we alter that, we start to see things happen. So sometimes as simple as calming down, sometimes I tell patients, can you take 2 breaths before you even start eating? Can you just at least switch systems, right? So this is a really classic way that stress leads to poor digestion, which can make us sick, right, in a sense. So then if we think, as we move through the chain, right, so after the stomach, we go to the small intestine, the large intestine. Now, there are very significant statistics that say that patients who take acid reduction medication have a much higher rate of irritable bowel syndrome. So if we're kind of starting now, if we go back tracing to this is really all stress, right? So this is really to say, and it's certainly not within my scope to diagnose, and there are certainly some patients who absolutely need those medications, but what I've learned is sometimes we go back and rewind the tape and figure out how and when things started. We can often get it connected to stress and lifestyle. So in the small and large intestine, so some of you may have heard, sometimes we call the large intestine the second brain. So the enteric nervous system that lines that is our nervous system, right? So I can tell you anecdotally, patients who have inflammatory bowel disease, things you've heard of like Crohn's or colitis, when you get them stressed, they'll have a flare. I've had patients who will completely dump their food, be at a meal, be so stressed, they'll go in the washroom and their food, that's it, in an hour, right? And you think, well, how's that possible? Doesn't it take like hours for the food to go through the whole GI tract? Not when the nervous system, not when you're in an emergency mode, because I'm in an emergency, I'm in the wrong system, right? So it doesn't support digestion. But what we also see is that when we see this decreased transit time, so that just means the time that the body goes through, the food goes through the GI system, that leads to changes in intestinal flora. Now, some of you may be hearing a lot more about the microbiota. We're hearing a lot of talk about probiotics. Most people are familiar with probiotics. There's certain products you see on TV that advertise about having good probiotics. So the numbers change every day, but at a minimum, you have 3 trillion, with a T, bugs in your gut. More than you have cells in your body, you have bugs. My biochemistry teacher used to say, we're just a big bag of bacteria, right? So what we're learning about that, though, is that it's kind of like a neighborhood there. So the neighborhood of the bugs, just like every good neighborhood. So here in Bloomfield, in this neighborhood, they're building some apartments across the way here, right? So some people are a little nervous about the impact on the neighborhood, right? Is that going to make things, going to be traffic? So the gut is similar. We like good urban planning, right? We never want all commercial. We would never put big commercial warehouses next to a really nice neighborhood, right? We like a little variety. Our gut's the same way. We know there's some guys we need in small portions, some we need in big portions. Hopefully those good guys can help balance out any bad guys that come in, just like any good neighborhood, right? But we know that stress actually can change the bugs in our gut. Kind of makes sense, right? It also sometimes can create changes in gut permeability. So some of you have probably heard the term leaky gut. Have anyone heard that term? So leaky gut speaks to the permeability of our gut, which is not supposed to be permeable, right? It's supposed to be like a stone wall. And so when we metabolize our food, the body has a very special way. It takes those nutrients across that membrane. If we start to get gut permeability, then we start getting issues with food sensitivities and immune challenges, right? Because things come across that membrane now, and the body goes like, well, wait a minute, I'm not programmed for this. I think we've got a little problem here. I think I'm being attacked. This is a foe. Now we see an immune system get triggered, right? So you can see over time how this can layer. It can also lead to elimination issues. So constipation, millions of people are constipated. It's one of the most common things that patients come to me for. And they've had experiences where they move their bowels once a week. Mm-hmm. Imagine emptying your trash every couple of weeks in your kitchen. It's not, especially in the summer, right? That's a pretty serious thing. So those things can happen from stress, right? So when you see this sort of cascade, so we get a diagnosis, right? IBS, irritable bowel. Lots of statistics about irritable bowel. A lot of people have irritable bowel or inflammatory bowel, which we just talked about. So we can kind of see, if we sort of trace, I've got a lot of stress at work, how it could actually lead to a GI diagnosis. And not to oversimplify it, but I've seen this happen, that sometimes if we can step back and rewind the tape a little bit, we can find out that stress really can make us sick. And the one thing I'll say about that is, we'll talk about this as the immune system. So I had a very thought-provoking professor when I took my master's program. And he used to say, we give all these diagnoses, we create all these diseases, we give names, and we see now, because we have medicines advertised on TV, we hear about all kinds of things, right? All kinds of disorders, and sometimes things you kind of never heard for exactly, or you didn't think they were a big issue, all of a sudden now have a medicine to match them. But he used to say, if you think about it, maybe they're not actually diseases at all, but a perfectly appropriate response from our body given the data that it received. Is it really a disease, or is our body just going like, hello, this isn't working. Like, how would you expect me to handle this? I couldn't keep up with this, whether it's what you're ingesting or, how you're living your life. So sometimes it's good, we tend to get frustrated about that. People get frustrated with the diagnosis. I respect that, thinking their body kind of went out on its own, right? It's like, wait, I'm over here living my life and my body went, and now I've got this diagnosis. And never in any way to blame, but it's always good to say, again, how can we get to the root of how do we get there? And often patients with some thinking can put pieces together. Yep, I got really sick, and then I had that really stressful thing happen. I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't sleeping, and I didn't eat so good for about 6 months, and then I got the flu again, or, we'll see sort of this pattern. So this is where we tie stress to the immune system. So we talked about cortisol and stress chemicals. They are inflammatory by nature. So again, they're meant to be in and out, right? Quick and done. We're done. Emergency's over. Everything's good. We go back to that homeostasis. But those inflammatory molecules, when we're in chronic stress, when we're always in the emergency, they actually break down the immune system at all levels, and they impact blood sugar levels. So this is a really interesting way how we get stress, inflammation, and now blood sugar issues. So cortisol, when it's secreted, it is roaming around saying, okay, we've got this emergency, I'm prepared to go. So let's create a scenario, which I don't think is a far-fetched one, based on some of the clients I've seen. Really stressed. I have had just like the craziest day. I've got all these deadlines. I'm driving by my favorite fast food place, and I'm going to get like a big milkshake, like a really big one, because that's going to make me feel better. So that has a lot of sugar in it, right? So some of you may have done that once or twice in your life. So that has a lot of sugar in it. So now we've got a scenario where we've now eaten a lot of sugar. So when the sugar gets the bloodstream, insulin, right? Insulin, everybody knows about insulin, says, great, I know exactly what to do. I'm going to help get that into the cells. Cortisol says, hey, insulin, I'm so glad you showed up. I don't want you here. We're in an emergency. I don't want you putting anything in the cells. I need it because we're running. We got to run. I don't want you. And so insulin is by nature a storer. And it says, hey, I just got to store. Somehow I got to store. If I can't get it in the cells, I know what I'll do. I'll just store it as fat. So now we start, that's when we've had a stressful situation. Maybe we've had a rough few months based on something in our life. We haven't been eating good. And we go to our doctor and they say, your blood sugar's a little off, right? Your hemoglobin A1C, that's a value that a lot of us know about. Has anyone had that tested ever? Hemoglobin A1C, hemoglobin is red blood cells. It's just telling you how sugary are your red blood cells. Have they been washed in sugar a lot or a little bit? So your doc says, hey, your blood sugar is a little high. That's how that happens, right? So now we've got this competition and the body can't quite keep up. So this is, in a way, the brilliance of the body, but where we start to see, again, we take this impact of stress, depleting our immune system, getting us inflamed, even coming into now our blood sugar levels, because too many things are happening at the same time. So to that end, high sugar foods, which is related often to stress eating, because many of us have a pattern that we learned from the time we're little that if it's a rough day, I know what'll make me feel better. And it's never broccoli, right? Broccoli's never like, oh, I gotta go home and have a big bowl of broccoli, right? It's something, a treat, right? Something sweet. And so we know, I've heard all kinds of stats on this. I've heard a teaspoon of sugar freezes your immune system for 30 minutes, but we know that sugar is never the friend of the body. The mouth is very happy with sugar. The rest of the team is not so happy because it's not a nutrient, right? It's just a calorie. And so, and some of you have heard me talk before, know I talk a little bit about that journey and how, about Marvin the mouth and Sammy the stomach and Larry the liver, my routine I do with kids. But the truth is, when you eat something like that, your body has to manage it because there aren't any side exits, right? So when you swallow it, it's got to take it through. There's no other choice. And often, and we've all had this experience, maybe it's Thanksgiving or the holiday party where we have like, well, I'll just try 3 of those desserts. Or I got to try all 6 cookies. And then when we're done, we're like, oh my gosh, we feel like we're going to go to sleep. And really, that's the body saying, hey, man, I'm going to start shutting stuff down because this is too much. And this is a lot for me to handle. So we got to conserve here. And so I'm going to put you to sleep because that's not a priority right now. I've got to somehow try to manage this high amount of glucose that you've just thrown at me because I can't use it. I can't use it to heal you. I've just got to manage it. And so that's where we see this connection. So it's sort of a second step connection with stress and the immune system. And then we just talked about the gut. So this term dysbiosis means that this microbiota has a bit of disorder in it. So the flora is off, and we see that a lot of times from the poor digestion and the inflammation. We talked about that. So the neighborhood gets changed. Now, when we eat a lot of sugar, or if we eat more processed food, again, body's got to manage that. That changes our gut flora. Things like diet sodas change our gut flora, right? We know now those artificial sweeteners are hard on our gut. We know that somewhere around 70% of our immune system lives in our gut. So now we see, is this the chicken or the egg, right? We see this kind of going back and forth, and we have now this imbalance in our immune system. So a really stressful lifestyle can really break down our immune system and make us sick. So I always have to throw in at least one cartoon. So this is a little goldfish in the blender, and said, and you thought there was stress in your life, right? So what really contributes, sometimes they're contributors or responses to stress. So eating is probably one of the most common. Fast food, sugar, and simple carbs. It's such a paradox. We all do it, right? It's the worst thing we could do when we're under stress for all the reasons we talked about. We don't balance blood sugar well when we're stressed. We're already in an inflamed state when we're in this state of chronic stress. That's often what we do. And I could probably argue that food creates physical stress, physiological stress, or when we're under emotional, mental stress, we eat that food, which creates a physical stress. So we could see how that could work. So drinking coffee. So coffee's another, not anti-coffee. I think there is definitely some indications for it, but it's another great example of taking the body out of homeostasis, right? Particularly if we're doing coffee after 12 o'clock, to me, means I'm probably using it as a drug, right? 4 o'clock coffee is usually because, man, I'm just not getting through. I am never making it till 6 if I don't have that cup of coffee. But coffee is a stimulant, right? Stimulants take us into a hyper state. Body doesn't like hyper states. It tries to rebound. But coffee, and some of you may be coffee drinkers. I've never been a coffee drinker, but I've definitely sat across from enough to know that it takes you up, but then it takes you down, and then it starts taking you really down, right? a cookie is such a great remedy, right? I just have my coffee. Now I'm just like, oh my gosh. And, they always put those vending machines in like the perfect place in workplaces, right? So, or there's always somebody at work who brings the treats. And so now that's where we get into those cycles, really stressed, had my coffee, I'm crashed. Now I'm going to try to help myself by having a bit of sugar. There are things which we don't need to go into detail, but addictions, right? That's what people, and again, ironically, I'm under stress, things like gambling or shopping, and then the bills come, right? Now I have mental stress. So it becomes, again, some of these things are both contributors and responders. And then a big thing that's really present now is technology. So we're fortunate to live, technology is amazing. I mean, we can, I could dial right now a friend who lives in, Switzerland, and we could have a conversation in 2 minutes. It's brilliant. Yeah, face to face. I could see them. It's like the Jetsons, right? But the problem is, it's like we're a little bombarded with it, right? So we're walking. It's that phenomena. Everybody's walking like this, right, on the street. And it's a little bit, sometimes we go to those things. Facebook can be a great stress reliever, but it also creates a lot of stress. It's a lot of stimulation, right, for the body that we sort of miss that calming kind of feeling. Okay, so now that we've painted the story of how we get there, we can talk a little bit about how we get into balance. So a lot of what I've described is sometimes normal life, right? Most people have jobs or families they have to look after or responsibilities. And so these are just some of the ways that really help us from a lifestyle perspective. So we'll talk about food as well. So, as a nutritionist, I'm always a little torn what to talk about first, but we'll start with lifestyle. So breathing, really interesting. Exhalation actually turns on the parasympathetic nervous system. So most of us have had the experience that maybe you were running for an airplane, or you had this really big project that you finished, or you got yourself all packed up to go somewhere. And most of us, I find, kind of naturally go, when we're done, right? We kind of all do that. And I've decided that I think it's the body saying, could we switch systems now? We did it. Like, let's switch over, because I really want to be in parasympathetic. So there's, in your packets, you have some breathing exercises. If I could say, if you took one thing home with you today and you feel like stress is a challenge for you, or you know somebody, start a simple breathing practice. Just teach yourself a couple of really simple breathing exercises, because it will shift the systems. It will take you into that parasympathetic system and calm down, right? So the other bonus is, of course, when we take in more oxygen, we're taking in energy. When we learn to fully inhale and exhale, we release toxins. So there's a lot of benefits to just a simple breathing exercise. I sometimes have patients do them at stoplights. That's your cue. You get a red light, that means you got to take 3 breaths while you're sitting there. Don't go to your phone. See if you can take 3 breaths. I had a patient once who was really busy life, an ER doc, didn't have the easiest home life, really stressed, couldn't really carve out the time. She used to park her car, I'm not making this up, 5 blocks from her house. She would drive from work, she'd park 5 blocks from her house and breathe. She'd put the timer on her phone and do 5 minutes of breathing just to switch her, just to get her calmed down so she felt like she could transition and go home. So there's so many ways to do it. Then, of course, relaxation, meditation, visualization. So this week probably could do literally a whole talk on. So I always encourage people to experiment with this. So I have a background as a yoga teacher. I've taught meditation, and everyone says the same thing. I can't meditate because my mind's too busy. I tried. I can't do it. Well, the truth is, everyone's mind is busy. That's the nature of the mind. So meditation doesn't mean shutting your mind off. It means you just start to learn not to run with it, right? With the puppy, right? So you're sitting to meditate, like, oh, this is great. I'm all good. I set up. It's calm. I got my music on. You know, I don't think I took that thing out. Yeah, I gotta call Jane. Yep, I gotta call Jane. Oh shoot, I didn't mail that letter. Right, the monkey mind starts right away. That's the nature of the mind. So, what meditation really teaches us is how to go like, oh wow, there I was thinking again, and come back. I don't know if anyone here has done meditation or relaxation, but I always suggest that you have somebody in your ears leading you, because it's a very, if you've never meditated, if you feel like you're a busy-minded person, it's a big leap to just decide, I'm just going to sit and meditate for 15 minutes hard. 5 minutes is fantastic. There's a Buddhist saying that says, if you can't find 5 minutes to meditate every day, you probably better find 2 hours, right? Because that means you literally don't have 5 minutes, you're in deep trouble. And so there's lots of avenues there. So there are guided relaxations, very, really helpful for the nervous system. Visualization. So sometimes people who are really busy-minded find a visualization really helpful because it keeps them sort of occupied, but it takes them right to another space. So there are DVDs, there are CDs, there are MP3s, there are apps, there are biofeedback devices. And when we send your emails, I'm going to send you just like a little resource list of, simple things. One of my favorite websites to get MP3s is called Sounds True. I don't know if anybody knows that website.
Yes. Good CDs too.
Great CDs. They do sales all the time, but if you're more traditional and you like those CDs, you can go that way. If you're more of an MP3 person, you can download. Really affordable. You can listen to them first. I usually recommend get 3 or 4 that you listen to them first. Do I like that person's voice? Could I actually hear myself, or hear that person guiding me? There's tons of apps. One of the other things I really love and I've used personally and professionally a lot is a company called HeartMath. So HeartMath is a wonderful company in that it's very philanthropic. They work a lot with veterans, PTSD, active veterans and, veterans who have come home. And they work with a biofeedback device that you put the clip either on your finger or your ear, depending on the device. And it actually gives you a graphic. So you actually track. So they use the term coming into coherence. Your heart, it's very simple. You just breathe into your heart. You think about something that makes you feel good. Sometimes some people find it helpful to actually put their hand on their heart. It's that simple, but it tracks you. And so sometimes people who are a little competitive or feel like they get really distracted, it's nice because you see yourself come right when you come into coherence. You're like, oh, wow, I did it. I calmed down. So I think there are really many roads to Rome, we could say there. Many ways you can do that. And then I think the other thing is unplugging from electronics. So depending on where you are in your life cycle, that may be, maybe a big problem, might be a smaller problem. But if you have kids or, relatives or coworkers that are really just feel like they're just wound up all the time, sometimes that's a huge piece. Make a cutoff time, like after 9, no emails, or I'm shutting down my computer. There's even research to suggest, and it depends on how sensitive you are to it, that even having your Wi-Fi on in your house at night, if you're a person who feels sleep disruption, can be challenging. Some people put their Wi-Fi's on, breakers or, what am I trying to say? Strips, thank you. And they'll turn it off at night. At the very least, I always suggest, particularly if you use your phone as your alarm, put it on airplane mode when you're sleeping so you don't have that Wi-Fi because, we're electrical beings and there's definitely some impact. And I have seen people get calmer or their sleep improved by doing that, just to shut it down a little bit. And then sleep, right? Sleep, sometimes we call sleep vitamin S. Sleep's an issue for people, right? Very few people that I meet say, I'm great with sleep. I sleep 7 or 8 hours every single night. It's a challenge. Now, sometimes there can be physical things, right? Some physical imbalances interrupt sleep. Sometimes medications interrupt sleep. sometimes this whole stress cycle, sometimes being all ramped up at, a quarter to 11 and then trying to lay down at 11 and shut it off. That doesn't always work. But there's all kinds of research about sleep brain function, weight. So there's a lot of research. People who sleep 5 hours or less a night, much more likely to have weight issues. So there's a lot of things. And now if we think about it, if we kind of go back to our systems, makes sense, right? We need that parasympathetic doing house cleaning at night. So if we've shortened the time, if we're very stressed all day and now we're getting 5 hours of sleep, how could we ever get the body do its cleaning? How could it ever sort out and detox and get everything back in order if we don't give it time? So sometimes that's a huge piece that sometimes we need to support in other ways, which we'll talk about. And then alcohol, right? So alcohol, if we're going to speak biochemistry, it's a toxin. It's not a nutrient. So if you're a person, I'm not anti-alcohol, and I can respect if you have fine wine. Some people love to have a really nice glass of wine, but 2 or 3 glasses 4 nights in a row, too much, right? It definitely has a big impact on blood sugar, on immunity, and your liver, whose job it is to detoxify, has approximately 400 regular jobs it has to do every single day. So it's doing its jobs. Now we're throwing in 3 glasses of wine 3 nights in a row. So something's gonna have to get passed, right? How can it keep up? You can't hire more workers, right? It just has its one function. So you always want to think. So I always say to clients, if you love wine and you say, oh, I have 1 glass a few times a week, much better than 3 glasses at a time. That's hard on the body. In how it metabolizes. So sometimes that can be, we talked about, a stress reliever for some people, but if we're trying to create that balance, so we reduce physiological stress, that's a great way to do it. And then food, of course, we come to food. So we'll start with my first and favorite subject, which is fruits and vegetables. And they're just, I always say they're the rock stars of the food world, but I've decided I have to be more modern. Maybe I have to call them the rock stars, the hip hop stars, the rap stars of the food world, because I recognize that maybe not everybody's into rock, but they are just the magic of the body. The body loves vegetables for so many, and I've just listed a few. So phytonutrients, so you'll get in your email a nice chart that talks about the colors in vegetables and how they help the body. The things that give vegetables their color, those pigments, we call those phytonutrients, are magical. We don't even know about them. We're learning. Certain nutrients are we don't even have names for certain parts of them. So they're really, really powerful. Vitamins and minerals, right? So we think of macronutrients, which we'll talk about a little bit. Second, protein, fats, and carbs. And we think micronutrients, those are vitamins and minerals. Every single pathway in the body always has a cofactor, and it's always a vitamin or a mineral. So if we're low on that, we're going to have physiological stress. It's going to be hard on the body. We also know fiber. So fiber, the neighborhood of our gut loves fiber in its neighborhood, right? That's how we make our good bugs. So, and it's also, those are some of the ways that we balance blood sugar. So we'll talk about that even with protein. So sufficient protein. So there's a little trend right now. It's actually a big trend. The paleo diet, right? Most everybody's heard about paleo. There's labels on everything, paleo. Have you heard?
No.
So it ties back, it's the abbreviation for the Paleolithic man. So the belief is that the principles, a man by the name of Lauren Cordain is the man who started this, is that if we go back to eating more the way the Paleolithic man ate, that will bring us more balance. And I think there's some truth to it. So lean meats, nuts and seeds, vegetables, no legumes and no grains, because they were cultivated, right? So that's not necessarily true for every person, but what's happened in some cases, if you're familiar with it, is people are eating a lot of protein, which probably is a little too much protein. But we definitely need sufficient protein. Protein at its most biochemical level. Immunoglobulins, right? Our immune system immunoglobulins are made from protein. Hormones are made from protein. Enzymes that break things up are made from protein. So I definitely see a lot of patients who are not eating enough protein. And when we start to do the math, particularly breakfast is often light on protein because most of the foods that we love for breakfast are carbohydrates. And sometimes that can set us up to be more impacted by a stressful day, right? So where our blood sugar is low, we get thrown the project at 10 o'clock at work. Now we're like really stressed because we don't even have proper fuel. And that's, I think, one of the important parts of really focusing on the food. So as a rough target, I always think anywhere from 60 to 90 grams a day of protein. So it's a very easy formula. So 28 grams of protein, it's about the size of a deck of cards. It's about 4 ounces. So average adult, definitely maybe 3 to 4 ounces at a meal is probably good. 2 is probably sufficient. So that might be a little bio individual, but it's always good to have some because it helps balance our blood sugar. So we all know that experience of eating the big plate of pasta at the Italian restaurant and we go to sleep, right? An hour later, the carbs are so much. It's the same idea. The body's like, whoa, this is too much. But most of us have an experience of eating maybe a salad with some protein on it. And usually we feel pretty good from that because it's a good balance of macronutrients. And then healthy fats, right? Brain health, cell membrane. Some of you have heard me say this, but it never gets old from my point of view. So our cell membranes are about our cells' ability to communicate. We want very resilient cells, right? So type 2 diabetes is the ultimate of a breakdown in cell communication, receptivity. The cell can't receive anymore. So we want our cell membranes to be beautiful. So I've taken some courses with a very take no prisoners, really experienced nutritionist who I always say to my patients, I show them a picture of an avocado and I show them a picture of French fries and I say, what do you want your cell membrane to look like? Do you want it to be like an avocado or would you like it to look like a French fry, right? So most of us are going to choose avocado because just they're so supple and beautiful, right? And so that's where those healthy fats come in, right? So if we're balancing. So when we do a good job of balancing our diet, 2 things happen, right? We reduce physiological stress, right? Because we're probably not going to break down as much. And we also help our body withstand the stresses that come because we keep our blood sugar even. We don't have big highs and big lows. We keep things really even. And then, of course, avoiding sugar. So I like to be the glass half full. We talk about first what we should eat. So we talked about sugar. Challenging, right? We all love treats, most all. And people who don't like treats usually like potato chips, right? So we either like the salty or the sweet. It's never to say that somebody should never have a treat or, make a choice to have something really special, but to be doing it every day, several times a day, to be eating processed packaged breads, pizzas, pastas, cookies, candies, ice cream, really hard on the body, really hard on the immune system. And we talked about alcohol and caffeine. So when we really position, when we think about that functional medicine tree at the roots, so we also know when we feed the roots of a tree well, if anybody's ever had that experience, I know when I owned a home in Florida, I bought a very expensive palm tree. And boy, did we have to water that tree. It was like having a new baby. I mean, the schedule, because they were like, if you don't get those roots really nourished, it won't ever make it, right? So we probably have some gardeners in here. So when we think of the functional medicine tree, when we want to get to the root of the problem, we also know that those roots are what really sustain the tree. And this is, I would say, a really huge, huge foundation. So supplements. So that question gets asked a lot. Probably most of you take supplements. Everybody takes something. So that's a whole subject in itself. So what I'm just going to say in 2 sentences is not all supplements are equal. There's a lot of, I'm going to use a vernacular word, crap out there. Really poor quality. The thing with supplements that you have to be careful of is A lot of raw materials come from China, and there's a lot of toxicity in China. That's all I'll say. So the remedy for that is to really know your source when you get your supplements. Of course, the supplements that we use here at Integrative Wellness are what we call nutraceutical quality. So they come only through practitioners. You can't buy them in Whole Foods. And I would much rather, they have a cost to them, but I would much rather someone took less of a really good supplement than a lot of a poor one, because we know you're actually going to absorb it. So these are just some of the basics. And on our website, we have a little packet, what we call the basics. So a multivitamin, we use one that has phytonutrients in it. It actually has some of those. It's actually green. The tablet itself has some greens in it. Omega-3 fats. Most everybody's heard about that, right? Anti-inflammatory. You want really good quality. Vitamin D, actually. Most people, even people who live in the southern hemisphere, I have seen upon testing, it's very deficient in vitamin D. Really important. It's really more of a hormone than a vitamin. Probiotics, great, easy, general, just to be preventative, to bring in some good bugs is helpful. And then sleep nutrients. So one that we referenced for tonight is one called Lavella, which is actually based on lavender oil. That if you don't take it with enough water, you'll actually get that it was lavender. You can actually burp lavender. But what I'll say about that, this is sort of the basics. And what's probably equally important is certainly if we really go through, this is a good support to get folks going, but if you feel like you're out of balance or you know someone's out of balance, that's where we would really shift to the bioindividuality piece. And that's where we might say there may be some more specificity, particularly if stress has been a big issue. There's really wonderful supplements that can just help your body get back. Sometimes there's ways that we get out of balance. So we would like to always personalize. So you may want to consider, or you may know somebody who you think would benefit from a nutrition session with me. So one of the things that we definitely do one-on-one sessions for personalized supplement plans. Maybe you yourself are out of balance, or you know somebody who you feel like could use some help with that, and that's where the importance of having a one-on-one session comes in, because we're not all equal, right? We are all equal in that our body is not happy with sugar. It doesn't do well with chronic stress, but the landscape that those things come in is very different, and so sometimes we need to support the bodies in different ways. And the really wonderful thing about functional medicine is that, and I've been fortunate to work with many great doctors, including Dr. Mark Hyman, that everyone I've ever worked with says, you know what, nutrition, that lifestyle piece is really the whole thing. That's it. That's where the work comes. So it's often helpful to have that connection, because it does take a little effort, right? A little planning, a little guidance to eat well. It's not always what everyone is doing. So sometimes having that, one-on-one support can make all the difference. So thank you for coming. We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody has
the sleep nutrients?
Yes.
I'm wondering what's involved in sleep nutrients? What types of things?
Well, it really depends on sort of evaluating what's happening. So some people can't fall asleep. Some people can't stay asleep. Some people, because they've been under a lot of stress, their adrenal systems are a little overwrought. Sometimes we hear this phrase, wired and tired. People say, like, I'm exhausted, but I get into bed and I just can't shut it down. But I haven't slept for days. So often we need to support, again, back up a little bit and support the system itself. So that's really what I mean by sleep nutrients. But there are some definitive ones that you're probably familiar with, 5-HTP and melatonin and things like that.
Can you talk a little bit about Guillain-Barré syndrome?
I can't say that I'm very familiar with that enough to speak definitively. I think it's probably best handled like in a one-on-one to get the whole history of somebody.
What evaluations do you do on someone in the initial consultation, like to figure out their individualities?
Sure. Well, we do always offer which I didn't say, but you have a card in your folder. We always offer a free 15-minute consult if you're a person who's like, I'm not sure. I think this could help me, but I'm not sure, where we would talk about kind of what's up for you. If you feel like, yeah, I really want to dive in, I really want to work with a nutritionist who has this training, what we do is we have you fill out lots of papers, which nobody ever wants to fill out, but symptom questionnaires, food diaries, and history. And then that first session takes about an hour. And we literally will sit down and go through your life. Who are you? Who did you come from? What's your health history been like through your life? What are your goals? Where do you feel you're out of balance? What medications are you on? And then from there, we begin to develop a plan, right? Of how do we think? And a plan always has a few components. Definitely food. Food's always the foundation. But sometimes some lifestyle, maybe some exercise or stress management options. Supplements are usually part of that. And that takes an hour the first time to be
Is there
covered.
blood testing? Or?
I do have access to some specialty tests, so if they're needed, so I work with a few labs, SpectraCell, Genova, Diagnostic Solutions. So there are tests that we can do. And what I also do sometimes for patients, if they say, I really like to take advantage of my doc and my insurance, if you've got an open-minded doc, sometimes I'll just give you a little list and of recommended more conventional tests that can be helpful to look at through a functional medicine lens that you can get done with your doc. So sometimes we do both. Any other questions?
Another one.
Sure.
At the beginning of the talk, I thought about the effect of coping skills and how they're different within different people in the proverbial bucket that we all have for stressful events in life. And I don't know if it was just a thought that comparing what is stressful to me to what is stressful to like a girlfriend of mine. Would our ability to handle adversity is different.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually an excellent point. So we do know that genetically, some people are more high-wired. We know that in terms of different genetic variations, so in genetic testing, we know sometimes we learn certain things, right? We watch our parents and how they handle things or how they handle stress, right? Like I had a grandmother who would always say, I have a nervous stomach. My mother has a nervous stomach. And guess what? So do I, right? So I have that tendency. That's where I'll hold my stress. So sometimes that will happen. Sometimes people are what I call handlers. They're really cool on the outside, but they're swallowing it all, right? And they're the people who end up having digestive issues or things they don't talk about because they handle it. And there are, in fact, some people who seem to just, however their whole body works, they seem to roll very well with minimal stress. But I will say that I don't think it's ever possible for a human body to be under intense chronic stress and not take a hit at some point. But it is true that some people, the littlest thing seems to tip them over, and other people seem to be like, it's no big deal, I just moved on. So it's a good point. And those are some of the things we would talk about. I always ask about stress. Like, do you think you're stressed? How does stress show up for you? Because sometimes that can be helpful.
My feeling is that stress is inevitable. Some level of stress is
You are
inevitable.
correct. Yes.
You just have to kind of go with the flow and
Yes.
make a choice somewhere and go with the flow.
You're right. We talked about it. It's actually a part of normal life. The challenge comes when it becomes chronic and it starts crushing, like that first picture, right? Where people just feel like they don't get a break. Everything is stressful.
There are different types of protein you mentioned. That was very helpful, by the way, that 4 ounces is about 20 grams of protein. But how does that convert for cheese? I don't think 4 grams. 4 ounces of
Yes.
cheese
You know what? I have a little chart. Let me make a note. We'll put a little chart. There's a little protein chart we can send
that would
in
be great.
that kind of gives.
Okay.
Who's that?
I don't put cheese on it very much because I deal with a population, most of them can't have it. So, but it is part of it. Some people who don't do well with dairy. So
Do you work with children?
I do.
And I'm wondering how their digestive systems are different or the same, or what do you find?
They're really the same functionally. They suffer from, they don't always have the same language of how to articulate what's happening with them. Constipation's pretty universal, right? That one we know. We don't have to talk about that, right? I worked with a lot of kids. So, and I think with kids sometimes I'll often tell my kid patients, particularly those who are like 10 or 11, 12, I'll say, this isn't probably hard for you to imagine, but the fact that you're making a connection right now to food and how you feel is going to make you so much healthier when you become a teenager and a young person. And because so many of my patients that I see will tell a story like, yep, I remember when I was 12 or when I was 16, or, these seeds often get planted early, right? Yeah, that was always hard for me. And then we reach these tipping points where the body's like, yeah, we're done. So yeah, I definitely work with kids. Anything else?
Are there any proteins that you don't like people to eat?
Things that are processed or hormones, like poor quality meats.
Bacon.
I'm not anti-bacon. I think you can get clean bacon. I don't think it's not for everyone, but
Natural bacon.
yeah, there's things that don't have nitrites and things like that. Local sometimes is nice if you can get it. So yeah. So really the measure for most foods are how real and how natural is it? How close is it from the source,
Whether it has sugar in it or not.
Right. So, if you buy like black beans in the store, there's no label on black beans. Black beans, right?
Mm.
But if you buy this, fancy canned black bean soup, that's got a label and it's probably got this many things, right? And if they put it in a can, so we've kind of gotten
Some supermarkets, we have a super big Y near us.
right.
And the pastries. The pastries have lists like.
They do. That's one of those times, like I said, where your mouth is like a little bit happy for a minute, but once you're done and it leaves, the rest of the body isn't so happy. So I appreciate everyone's attention. I appreciate everyone coming.